Apocalypse.
He was some kind of god.
I don't know why people are complaining about this movie so much. I mean, we have the old cast from the 2000s coming back, and we have the new revamped cast from First Class. Oh wait, is that not this movie? Oh. So X-Men Apocalypse stars James McAvoy, Michael Fassbender, and Jennifer Lawrence as returning their roles in this new revamped X-Men timeline, since, you know, we're, like 24 movies in, and now the continuity is all messed up, so now we don't know where we're at in the timeline. But, you know, it doesn't really matter. Days of Future Past kind of soft rebooted everything, so it doesn't really matter. And plus, now we're in the 80s, and now we're getting kind of the original team, but in their teenage form, I guess. So we have Scott Summers, Nightcrawler, and some other characters that are joining the movie universe. Now, I have to be honest, I've always really liked the X-Men movies and kind of the allegory that they've kind of stood for in prejudice and just people that stick out like a sore thumb in society, and kind of how we have a place to fit in, or we could find a group of people that we feel normal. And if you consider, I mean, none of these properties by these different studios should be compared, but if you compare these movies to DC's movies and how dark they are, and Marvel's super colorful universe, this is really the middle ground. They're trying to ground it in reality and make it as dark as I think they can, while also having some light moments and have comedic elements to them. So I think that's another reason why I've always liked the X-Men franchise. And unlike Marvel, where it's kind of this grand plan and everything builds on each other, and you know that things are setting up for the next main event or the next movie to be set up, you know, judging by the post-credit scenes and just like the little hints that they throw in throughout. These X-Men movies seem kind of like they're just going movie by movie. They don't really have a legitimate plan, and it seems like they know at any movie they'll lose like their entire fan base somehow. They're just like, well, let's pray to God that this one works, which I think explains all the continuity errors, because if you watch all these movies one after the other, you realize how inconsistent the timelines are, and if you keep track of people's ages, like, if you think about it logically, I mean, the people in this movie should have aged 20 years from First Class, and yet they still look like young people. Now, I don't know if they'll ever get to this point, but they may just kind of do how comic books work in real life, where they explain everything by everything being an alternate dimension, you know. They could very well later down the line say, well, every movie is its own universe, or something like that, or just these 2 or 3 movies are its own universe. But anywho, X-Men Apocalypse is about a mutant who just so happens to be called Apocalypse wants an apocalypse to happen, and he wants to rule the world, and he wants only the fittest and strongest to survive, aka mutants, I guess. And it's up to the X-Men, the young and the returning cast, to combine forces and to work as a team and to take this big baddie down before he, you know, does a whole CG tornado thing and makes the whole world explode or something. I don't know. Does anyone know what his plan was? Kind of seems like he was just winging it. Anyway, I like this movie a lot, you know? I think that Days of Future Past was kind of very character heavy, and there was big stakes happening, and there was a lot of weight to the movie, and I think we kind of needed X-Men Apocalypse to just be that little breather in between filler story where you kind of just wanted to know what was happening further down the line with these characters. You just wanted them to not fight each other, you know? We've kind of getting a little bit of fatigue by having Civil War and Batman v Superman, and we don't need to have this inner conflict in every one of these movies. It was really nice just to have that classic comic book story where it's just big bad guy wants to destroy the world. Alright, good guys, go get him. So for that reason, I think the movie succeeded. I think it did what it was trying to do. Now, maybe I'm a little biased towards the X-Men movies just because they have a little place in my heart for them. So I kind of have this on a pedestal, different than Marvel and DC movies. X-Men movies have always kind of spoke to me in the metaphor that mutants mean. And X-Men 2, X2 United, is still one of my favorite comic book movies ever. I think it really nailed being a superhero movie while grounding it in reality, while also having some really cool, fun set pieces. This movie is expecting you to know the history, at least within this movie universe, or some of these movies, the rebooted universe, to carry the weight of some of these moments. I mean, there's flashbacks in this movie that is directly showing you scenes from First Class, so it's expecting you to know these things, and it's expecting that weight to be given to you from these movies prior. It's not really giving you the character depth that it should as a standalone movie, unfortunately. There's a couple scenes where it relies on flashbacks for the moment to have its weight. And if you haven't seen that movie, then I could understand where it would be really confusing and it just wouldn't hit the way that the movie wanted you to be hit. But you know, if you enjoy these comic book movies, which I clearly do, and if you just like kind of just action movies where you don't have to think so much about it and it's just good guys fighting a bad guy, then, you know, go watch it. I think you'll enjoy it. I mean, I'm kind of late to the party here, and I know that all the reviews and stuff have been out already, but there's just my little take on it. Now, I'm going to be getting into a few spoilers in some of the moments that I liked and I didn't like. So, if you don't want to have anything spoiled for you, then, you know, are free to click away from the video at the moment. Alright, ready? That's my last warning. What are some of the things that are good about this movie? Well, the introduction to the new cast. I really love the scenes with Scott Summers and Nightcrawler, how they were introduced. Nightcrawler was just like a cage fighter fighting Angel, and like it was showcasing his powers. And in the scene with Scott Summers in the school, we kind of see how his mutation was starting to grow at school, and he blasts everything, and that was neat. And Quicksilver came back from Days of Future Past. I actually kind of forgot that he was going to be in this movie, and so I guess people were expecting him to have a nice big moment like he did in Days of Future Past, and also a bigger role, which I kind of totally forgot. So when there's a scene like in the middle of the movie where he just comes in and he kind of has the same moment that Days of Future Past had, which was awesome. I mean, it's very similar to Days of Future Past. The price of admission alone is worth the Quicksilver scenes in these movies. I mean, I guess you could have a lot of fun with the guy whose power is just that he could run really fast. I mean, man, some cool visuals there. Flash, you're gonna have to step it up, bro. But not only the Quicksilver scene, but Nightcrawler, he has a moment, and if you even blink, you miss this moment where it shows his perspective almost. He grabs the professor toward the third act of the movie and he teleports, and it kind of shows the background shifting. That was so awesome. It's just little moments like that where it's kind of fan service, and it's like, hey, here's a take on a character that you haven't seen yet. Alright, now let's talk about the bad guys. Well, Magneto's awesome, but we all knew he was awesome from the last few movies that Michael Fassbender was playing Magneto as. We knew that him as an actor would carry the heavy moments that he needed to carry and that he would execute them well. Apocalypse, I think Oscar Isaac did pretty good as the big blue Smurf. But the other villains, you know, we have Psylocke in here, who fans have been wanting. Psylocke, you know, ninja lady with swords. And we get Archangel finally, and was there someone else? Oh, Storm. Jeez, I forgot Storm was in here. It falls under the same thing, the same problem that First Class had, where we had these villains in the background and they don't really say anything. They don't really have any lines. They're just there. They're just henchmen 1, 2, and 3, but they are like characters from the books. But unless you were a diehard comic book reader or an X-Men fan, you wouldn't know who they were. You'd be like, who's this girl? Mohawk girl. But in First Class, it didn't really matter because the story and the main villain were enough. You know, they were serviceable enough to not really care about the side henchmen. Now, this one falls under the same thing. I think Apocalypse is interesting enough as a villain, and you also had Magneto in there, which were strong enough to where I didn't really need to have all the backstories of Storm and Psylocke and Archangel. I mean, they're given like a scene to like introduce them, which is something, I guess, but we don't really have to care about them. We just have to continue the story, and this movie has a pretty long runtime, so you kind of have to keep things moving. Now, the third act of this movie is kind of set piecey. Like, where they're fighting at, it doesn't really have any weight or consequence. I mean, it's little shots like just having extras, like getting crushed by rubble or reacting, that it's so important to have in the movie, where it's a movie about destroying the world. You know, you need to have the repercussions in place, or to have some kind of stakes, which Days of Future Past, everything was on the line, you know. And in this movie, it seems like there's no consequence whatsoever. There's just all this destruction, and you don't know why it matters. You just know that they had to beat the big bad guy. And Apocalypse's plan is kind of always shifting. He starts off trying to destroy the world, but then he realizes that Professor X can control minds, so then he wants to control everyone's minds to, I think, just have them be under control, or I don't know if he's gonna just kill them all and just have the mutants survive. It wasn't really clear. I'm sure that upon the third watch, because I've already seen this movie twice now, and I still kind of was unclear. It might be a passing line where he's very specific in what he wants, but, you know, it's not really carried out or, you know, expressed heavily. But all in all, some of the fan service things, and I really think that X-Men Apocalypse is really just to serve the X-Men fans, because you have a moment in the middle of the movie where Wolverine comes out and he's in his Weapon X suit like in the comics, or at least it looks pretty reminiscent to that, and you have at the end moment where Jean is using the Phoenix Force, and, you know, if you were watching this for the first time, you'd be like, why the heck is this girl on fire? Someone put her out! Get a fire extinguisher. So I really think that that's why the reviewers and Rotten Tomatoes and everything, it's really right down the middle, because it's not a movie that you could just walk into fresh. It's really an X-Men movie for X-Men fans, and still I know that hardcore comic book fans are not really gonna like it because it's not that faithful to the comics, and it never really has been. So it's just serving to the X-Men movie audience lovers, which, I mean, I guess I'm in that little cesspool because I really like this movie, but again, this movie has no consequence. Our characters end up exactly how they began, and there's not really a follow-through arc between all these movies that they're going through. They just stay angry, stay at the mansion, they just stay in their state of whatever, and I think that's where it fails as a movie, but still it's enjoyable to watch, and there's enough things in there that are really cool and set pieces that are really neat. So when it comes to rating this movie, setting aside my X-Men bias and my love for these characters, I'll try to rate this, you know, accordingly to, you know, everyone's viewing experience, or at least how I think that they would. I'm gonna give X-Men Apocalypse a 3.5 out of 5.